Welcome back to Citizen Extra, this being the third hour live on Citizen TV. My name is Wahiga Mwaura. Before we switch gears and talk matters business and doing business during an election year, a lot of you have been sending us feedback regarding a topic we're discussing over the last 2 hours or so, IEBC and election preparedness. Let's take a look at some of your tweets now on our magic wall here. Brighton Ouma says, IEBC has a mandate to regain public confidence. I therefore believe they will deliver. Okay, let's take a look at the next tweet there. Jeff Morio says, I believe that they will seal all loopholes and avoid all mistakes they earlier did. Wish them well. Dante Kenya 71, interesting name there. I am not quite confident. I just hope they do not mess up for the second time. It's taxpayers' money they are wasting, and some of us are really broke. That's a topic we'll be talking about, being broke in an election year because of the nature of business. Edward Ambale, nope, IBC cannot do that. They have failed us before. We cannot give them another chance. And I think we have one more. Empero Joe, every human being is as capable of good as they are of evil. If they can draw from their patriotism and sense of national duty, they will. Thank you so much to everyone who took time to write to us, 22422, our SMS line, and on social media as well, at Citizen TV Kenya. Let's now talk about business and the effect that the political year has had on doing business in this country. To help me look at that, I'll start with the far right. Joram Winamo, founder, Wild International. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Next to him, Anzetse Were, a development economist. Welcome to the program as well.
You.
And Maurice Odwor, investment manager, Saiton Investments. Welcome to the broadcast as well.
Thank you.
Right, and of course you can talk to us on 22422. I will be sampling your SMSs even as we carry on with this discussion. Let me start with you, Joram, founder of an SME. How has the year been for you?
It's interesting. I would say for me this is probably my third election cycle running my own business.
Okay.
And so I had done some preparations, and I was just going to talk about that because
give us an idea of how you
actually 2 years ago, because I've been through two very painful elections. It's a trend that in this country during an election year people will not make decisions, people will not purchase, they will not come up with new budgets to do new things. Everyone kind of says let's wait and see until after elections when we can do X, Y, and Z. So having been through two elections where my business almost closed down, okay?
Almost
just
closed,
simply
okay.
because nobody is paying, payments outstanding and the like. This time around we were just like, can we prepare way in advance? And, earlier on I used to wonder why a lot of the older people would always have property on the side such that even if their business slowed down, they would always have some money that would, kind of help them to survive through that. So having made some prior preparations, I would say it has been a bit smoother this year. But it is true that very few people are actually committing to do like new big projects. So I'm in the field of consulting. We usually help people, chart the direction forward. But nobody will really commit those budgets. They're always like, okay, it's almost become a joke now. Let's wait and see until after elections and let's decide what we can do.
Okay.
So many of us thought that by August 10th, 11th, we would be back up and running. And even many people had said, let's talk the week after elections.
Yeah.
Oh,
even now, yeah, it was a joke, and now we are back to 3 weeks later, and then we have another 60 days to the election. So that period has just been extended, and it's getting difficult. I know quite a number of people who've actually shut down their businesses just simply because of money drying up. I think there are certain sectors that may be a bit resilient, but I know most of the people that I talk to are actually suffering.
And that's it. We've been campaigning, we as a nation have been campaigning unofficially since last year, and then we could say officially a lot of campaigns were launched in December, so we're talking about 10 months ago. And now if we go up until next month, we'll be heading to our 11th or 12th month, depending on when you started your campaigns. What has this meant for our economy?
Well, I think adding on to what he's saying, we need to understand that on average in an election year, GDP goes down by about 1 to 1.5%, and it takes about 26 months to recover from an election year. Okay,
almost 2 years.
Yeah, it takes a long time to recover. So if you look at the Q1 GDP growth that Kenya had this year, it was about 4.7%. Compare that to 5.9% last year. So we're already beginning to see there's a knock-on effect that elections tend to have. In fact, 7 out of the last 10 elections have had a negative effect on the GDP. Now, the reason why that's important is because, as he's saying, there's an air of uncertainty, there's an air of an investment climate that's not clear, and we've just been downgraded by Moody's. We're now credit negative. Which means
when did they release their?
A few days ago.
Okay.
So in the short term, we're having real problems with instability. As you know, the NSE lost 50 billion in 10 minutes on Friday. They now lost over 100 billion. We've seen some recovery in that, but as you know, the NSE is a good window to look into foreign investment attitudes and appetites, and that's a clear indication that they were a bit worried about the Supreme Court decision. I think one of the other problems that people need to understand is that this has already been a really hard year for SMEs. First of all, we started with a drought, okay, which made everything very expensive, particularly food items. So already people were struggling with meeting their basic needs and necessities. Then on top of that, this is the year we really felt the pinch of the interest rate cap. When the interest rate cap was introduced last year, everybody thought it would increase access to credit, but as I had said from the beginning, it's going to contract liquidity, banks will not lend, and the first people who are hit are SMEs, the people who are self-employed.
So you were one of the lone voices.
I was one of the lone voices that said, don't agree to this deal. But
nobody listens to you.
No, it's a sad, but I've been vindicated.
Yes, you have.
So we need to understand that SMEs are already functioning in environments where they're not getting access to the credit that they used to, where they have their costs that are spiraling, and now we have a political year on top of that, where money is not being released because of what the gentleman has been pointing out. People are not making decisions. I'm a consultant in the economic field, and I can assure you this whole year has been lost to politicking. And it's going to take a while for us to get back to a space where people feel stable enough to come in, make investments, and be confident about it. So the larger corporations are okay because they have the financial buffers to get them through this time. But it is the SMEs, people in the informal economy, and you need to remember that 90% of employed Kenyans are in the informal economy and in SMEs. So we're talking about most Kenyan sources of income are really being compromised by the combination of the drought, the interest rate cap, and now elections.
Okay. Maurice, let me allow you to weigh in on what Joram and Anzete have just talked about.
If you look at the investment environment in Kenya, mainly we track the performance of Nairobi Securities Exchange. We saw the market was sort of like doing away with the effects of election to the better part of this year.
Okay. But
if you look at now the pre-Supreme Court ruling, market, there was a lot of panic selling and market just dropped. And that one even estimated about 140 billion that was lost during that time.
Okay.
It has been trying to recover, but we are yet to go back to the Supreme Court ruling levels. If you look at where we are going in terms of Kenyan investment environment, there are still opportunities, but the third part is that GDP growth for this year will come lower than last year. We are projecting between 4.8 to 5%. If you look at that, it ties on with what she has said about a drop of about 1.2% based where we were performing last year. But if you look at all this, put them together, going where we are going forward in terms of institutional framework that we've had in Kenya. In fact, nowadays it's more predictable, and even political environment is sort of more predictable in terms of where we are likely to go. Because all of us were aware that when the results were released, NASA only had two options, either to go to court or to refuse. I think it was better for them to go to court because once you choose to obey the frameworks and the institutional guidelines that are there, it's more predictable.
Okay.
So I think these are just they are without the challenges that we are facing, but I think in terms of long term, Kenya still have strong investment prospects.
Okay, so long term is a positive, and I was hoping that you would give me and Kenyans some good news. Because right now, so far, all we're talking about is bad news. We cannot ignore what's been happening on the political front as we talk about our business environment. There were, despite prophecies of doom, if I can use such an expression, by international players, the Supreme Court judgment was pretty much well received across board in terms of our stability as a nation. Can we say, and I want each of you to help me look at this, that in the long term, despite the current quote-unquote poor state of the economy, that what we are seeing right now in terms of democracy could lead to a stronger Kenya even financially?
I can perhaps start with that.
Okay.
I think we need to understand that there are two effects going on here. We've got the short and medium term effect, which is sort of what we're talking about now. But as the gentleman pointed out, there's a long term effect where we're building the credibility of the institutions of the country, where we're creating a chart where if people are contesting, they will go to the courts, they will go to the streets. So there will be less anxiety, I think, going forward around the elections in Kenya because people believe that we have institutions that are credible and that respect the rule of law. So in that sense, in the long term, it will work well. But I think we need to really start the process of delinking our economy with political processes. But we understand...
Are there countries that have...
I was just going to get into that.
Okay.
One of the problems we're having as Kenya is structurally because we're a young democracy and a young economy. So those two tend to speak to each other a lot. In some of the older economies, particularly in the global north, you'll find that they have economic institutions that are stable, that have been, running for centuries now. And so politics sort of happens, unless it's a big deal like Brexit, which is a political decision that has economic implications. But if you look at terms of elections, they sort of go on, but the institutions carry on, the civil service carries on, services continue to be delivered. So I think we need to be very deliberate as Kenyans and as Africans to create an institutional structure that is stable so that politics doesn't keep on having this knock-on effect on our business and our economy.
Actually, if I can add to that, it's interesting that I think one of the trends that was kind of against the grain this year was that the stock market started recovering before we actually went into elections. And it was probably one of the highest levels it's ever been pre an election. And what we were expecting after that is that usually, if you look at the trend like for the last 15 years, immediately after election it starts to pick up, and then 2 years after election it's usually at its highest. Now this decision has kind of put it in limbo a little bit, but it's very interesting how you can actually map Kenya's economy to the election cycle, and a lot of people end up planning based on the election cycle, which is a bit sad. I've lived and worked in other countries, and there are times you'd not even tell the country is undergoing an election. It's only the citizens, because they're interested, you'd have them go vote and even go back to work. But for us, everything comes to a standstill. So I think she's right in terms of we need to find a way of our economy being able to run without the sentiments being attached to the political decisions that are going on. I don't know structurally what that will take, but right now it's too painful for particularly the business people, and it's really the small businesses, as she said. They tend not to have reserves. I mean, we live month on month in terms of paying the bills. So when you have a period where you go for 2 or 3 months without getting any new business, or the sales are low, you find that trickles down. You have to start thinking about decisions like, do I let people go because I cannot continue to pay them? SMEs will still tighten their belts because they tend to have a heart. It's families that are depending on you. So what you'd find is that the wealth continues to be squeezed out completely, where people have to completely use their reserves just to keep their businesses going, and probably even get into a lot of debt. But as she said, now on the other side, the banks have kind of capped how much they're lending to keep their businesses going.
So you're stuck.
So you have the entrepreneurs are really in a space where they've really been squeezed into a corner. And if you talk to everyone, it starts getting to a point where we're like, we don't even care about the leadership anymore. Like, can we just get over and done with this thing, because this fighting or clamoring to have our person get into power is now beginning to affect, in a very dire way, the day-to-day operation.
I'm almost wondering if insurance companies should introduce a policy that maybe is alive every 5th year to help shield SMEs from the challenges they face. Of course, what has been your experience running your business in this election year? 22422 is our SMS line. Talk to us. I'll read some of your messages when I get a chance, and on social media as well. Maurice, so what we're hearing is that there's a graph that one can almost predict will always take place, or a trend during an election year. So in the build-up to an election year, our economy dips and then takes about 26 months to go back up again, and then you get closer to an election year, dips again. But this time around, we have a Supreme Court judgment that has sent us back to the ballot box within the same election year. How will our graph then change? What do you predict will be the length of which will remain quote-unquote depressed? When will the graph begin to rise again? What can you predict as you look forward?
If you look at the key sectors that are driving GDP growth in Kenya, if you look at contribution of agriculture to overall GDP is about 30%. And we saw the poor performance of agriculture this year that again resulted into the slowdown in economic growth. Another sector that have been seriously hit is financial services, because if you look, banks now currently are not loaning out mainly because of interest rate cap. If you put all these, take agriculture contributing 30%, financial services contributing about 10%, you're talking about 40% of the Kenyan GDP is suffering.
Wow.
These sectors are
at
suffering.
Least 40%.
So at least 40% contributes. So what we need to do now is how do we now again resuscitate financial services sector to continue contributing strongly towards GDP growth? How do we ensure that agricultural contribution does not slow down significantly, because most of them is a result of poor weather conditions? But how do we ensure that how do we diversify economy further so that we don't suffer significant shock when there's a shock in one specific sector? If you look at what we need to do, is supposed to ensure that there are conducive business operating environment. We ensure that there's loan access to credit by small and medium enterprises funds, enterprises. If you look at the main idea behind interest rate cap was to avail credit to this institution, but it has achieved the opposite. So we need now to rework everything, all the frameworks. And again, the most important thing, look at African countries. The third thing is politics and the economy, they tend to move hand in hand, but suddenly enough, the sad story in Africa is that politics moves ahead of economic issues, so that politics invite economic performance. We need to ensure that we separate the two. We have strong institutional economic framework to ensure that economy continues to operate, and again we have strong constitution with guidelines in terms of how to ensure that political process also remains transparent and also sort of like predictable, so that despite political process going on, economic activities also continue to go on. Again, if you look at where we were currently as a country, the decision that we need to make is, do we want to continue like this, holding six elective positions at the same time, or now a time where we can now say we separate them? Because if you look at, do we want to go the US mode where they have midterm elections, where let's say you can even go for election for half of the parliament, half of the senate, then you put presidential election separate? Because if you look at where we are now, it's likely more than 129 cases that have been filed in court. The reference is mainly going to be on the Supreme Court ruling, because we can't say the Supreme Court, the presidential election was poorly conducted and these other ones were good. So we need to make those tough decisions to ensure that we continue on that strong economic path as a country.
So, and maybe Anzetse can help us weigh in on something that, a discussion that you've started. If we were to separate our elections, so where you have a set happening maybe after every 2.5 years we are in one election or the other, how would that work favorably for our economy or not? On one hand, some would say that it would reduce the pressure, because now you're not looking at so many posts being contested for at the same time. But on the other hand, others would say that Kenya would permanently be in a campaign period where, for example, if you elect a president in this year, that president then begins to look around for who will be the MPs from their party, and so will always be in an election cycle. How could that potentially play out?
I mean, I think you've outlined the options well. I think on one hand, what will happen, I'm thinking about macroeconomic factors, is that things like fiscal policy and monetary policy will have to be quite stable, regardless of what's going on in the political sphere. So in that sense, the levers that we have to control the way the economy grows in a certain extent will have to have a certain level of stability that cannot be overly informed by the politicking. On the other hand, there is real problem that there will be political capture, and I'm thinking particularly at county level, where governors will be busy politicking for their MPs, for their senators, for the presidential candidates. But I think at some point, what will happen is that maybe the people with political positions will be busy, but the technocrats will be at work. And they'll be busy running the country, running the counties, running the national government. So in that sense, it may engender more sort of institutional stability and structure, so that politics is just stuff that just sort of happens, and then we get on with our life. But I think in terms of just building on what he's saying, in terms of some of the economic impacts that having this election is going to have on our economy, is that we need to understand that the national government was in the process of creating an austerity budget where they were trying to really ramp down on spending, because our expenditure has been growing very aggressively. It's been growing at about 14%. In fact, it's Titan that did that analysis, where it's growing at about 14%, and our ability to generate revenue is growing at about 12%. So we're borrowing more and more and more. So government is really in the process of ramping that down. Now we have an extra 10 billion that will have to come from somewhere to finance this presidential runoff. So we need to understand that there are real economic costs, and we need to understand that Kenya is already very expensive in terms of our elections. If you look at the cost per person, we charge about $25 per person in an election. Compare that to Ghana, which is $12. Rwanda, it's $1. Uganda, it's $4. Okay, so we really have very expensive elections. So in the spirit that national government is trying to bring to the table of ramping down expenditure, this becomes a real problem, because this money is going to have to come from somewhere, and it will not come from recurrence, because usually recurrent is not touched. People don't have a problem spending recurrent. So we're risking a situation where we're going to pull more money out of development expenditure to finance this election, which is not a pretty picture for us in terms of our fiscal position.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll come back to both of you, Anzetse and Maurice, to talk about interest rate cuts, because clearly that's a topic we can't avoid. And other matters as well. But for you, Joram, you hinted at 2 years ago sitting down to discuss possible measures to mitigate the situation that we're in now. Maybe you can help us understand what some of the thoughts were around that. What are other SMEs doing to protect themselves from the challenge that we face right now in this economy?
Okay. I think the main thing is that because the cycle has been quite predictable over a 20-30 year period, if you know certain things are going to happen, then the best thing to do is be prepared. Some of the things that you can do as an SME, you know, right now, talking about it now, it may be a bit late, but, you know, going into the next election, maybe some people can think about it, but it's just beginning to prepare for how can we do business during that time. Some of the things that we thought about was diversification. Kenya happens to be the hub of business in East Africa. There's a lot of regional offices that are actually stationed here. Can you diversify such that you end up doing business not just in one jurisdiction? We don't hold our election cycles across East Africa at the same time. So growth can actually be a defensive strategy, where you're saying that instead of doing business in Kenya alone, can I do business in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania? Even within the Kenyan economy diversifying, there are certain industries that do well during elections, maybe marketing related, you know, printing of this, that, and the other. So you could try and align your business to, can I get clients or develop products and services that can be delivered to the sectors that do well during elections, so that, you know, as the election boom happens, and you can make some money on that side and keep your business going. Some of the defensive things which is difficult to do is just looking at cost cutting and making sure that you manage your costs. Don't do anything extravagant during the election year. Conserve as much money as possible. Spend that time, the downtime, improving, you know, your processes or thinking up of new products and services, so that, you know, people are not just sitting in the office idle, but you're actually taking that time to think about what else can we do. I was talking to somebody the other day who was like, now we have another 60 days, what are we going to do? And what I advise them is, can you go and think about, you know, brainstorm on a list of 10 things you can do, or, you know, to generate money today, because to some extent the whole let's wait after election becomes an excuse.
Yes.
If you look at the reason why the stock market went down, nothing fundamentally changed, except, you know, it's not like something was pulled out of the economy that says now we are a less valuable country. It was based on sentiment, and therefore knowing that sentiment is an important thing means if the fundamentals are still there, it means that there still could be some underlying opportunities which you're not seeing because you're focused on let's wait until after elections to get things going again. But there could be opportunities that you're able to mine by looking at, despite the fact that a lot of things have slowed down, there could be still some investors who are still making quiet investments. They may not be doing it loudly, so you're not seeing it out in the media.
Allow me to interrupt you, Joram. You've spoken very well to people who can afford to get onto a plane, fly to Uganda and explore business opportunities there. The Mama Mboga, the hawker in town. What options do they have?
Unfortunately, the options get, you know, are more limited the lower you go in the economic, you know, class section. But I tend to think, and we've kind of discussed this before, that sometimes they are a bit more resilient than the larger SMEs, just because they're in a space where they don't operate in the same economy as the rest of the people. But the same principles, in my opinion, would apply in terms of just conserve as much money as you can. I don't know how much they have to conserve at that level, but it really would be the same principles of, if you've not been able to stash anything, then don't be extravagant in trying out anything new. Think about, like in the short term, right now there's been an opportunity that has been created, while on one side you find when they banned the whole plastic thing, an entire industry was in essence killed, but another one was burst. You find very smart entrepreneurs who ran to look for what are the alternatives that can be sold here. So while you find one set of people crying, another set of people is celebrating because of the big opportunity. So in a sense, entrepreneurs are very resilient people, and the reason they become entrepreneurs is because they spot opportunities where other people don't. And so my advice is, instead of looking at the excuse of elections, why don't you try and spot what opportunities could be right under your nose that you're not seeing? So put the excuse aside and then ask yourself, what can I do during this period that can enable me to keep running? I'll just give maybe one other example. You could you know, get your team together or think about what can we do collectively that will help us ride through this period. Like as an entrepreneur, don't generate all the ideas by yourself. Instead of people losing jobs, are there things you can do collectively that can help you lower costs so that you get things running for a bit longer? So the options are usually there. It's just that when we are stuck in looking in one direction of let's wait until after elections, then we could be killing the creativity that can help us survive during that time.
Maurice, Joram, thank you for those insights. Maurice, let me bring you in now. Tourism, how has it performed this year? Of course, it's always been a key focus during an election year. This time around, would you say it's weathered the storm?
If you look at the performance of tourism, as one of the best performing sector in Kenya for 2016, the recovery has been very strong, making strong contribution towards GDP growth. Expectations still, again, we are approaching the peak tourism season, which again we expect still tourism to continue performing better.
The peak season starts when?
The peak season starts around mid-September.
Okay. Okay.
So if you look at now the performance of tourism in the year 2017, it's going to be better than last year. But I think even we can't rule out the impact of what the environment that we have currently in terms of the political environment will weigh in the performance of tourism. But we expect tourism to continue performing better in this year than last year.
How has it managed to overcome the challenges of previous years? Is our marketing out there more effective? Are our institutions stronger so tourists trust that they'll be safe in Kenya? What do you think has made the difference? I know you're not in that industry, but maybe you can weigh in.
If you look at where we are in Kenya, especially even if you are complaining of this environment, but it's better environment compared to where we've come from as Kenya. At least things are predictable. At least there are strong institutional frameworks that at least guarantee people security. If you look at even the number of travel advisory Kenya suffered this year, they are less than if you even compare with 2007. I think the levels of reform that we've done, the level of promoting Kenya's tourism, the things that the government has done, is now bearing fruit.
Okay, okay. And let's say you brought up the issue of interest rates cap. Depending on who will take over after the upcoming election, would you advise them to scrap that law? Do you think that would... Oh, you have an immediate answer. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I absolutely would, and there are really very serious reasons why that's happening. One is what we've talked about, where SMEs are not getting access to credit, and one of the problems is that that's the engine of our economy, and when that's not getting the liquidity and the money it needs to grow, expand, and be creative along the lines that this gentleman is talking about, then that has real impact in terms of people's levels of income. That's one. So it's that. But the other big thing is monetary policy. The interest rate cap has made it very difficult for the Central Bank of Kenya to effectively implement monetary policy. One of the main tools that the Central Bank of Kenya has to control things like inflation, and we've seen inflation really be very aggressive this year, mainly because of the drought, right? And one of the things in the past, if there was no interest rate cap, is that they would typically raise the interest rates to sort of control the flow of money in the economy. But now in the context of an interest rate cap, they cannot use that tool because we don't know the impact that it will have going forward. In fact, I'm of the view that this may be a bit technical, but I'm of the view that raising the interest rate cap may actually expand liquidity, which is the opposite of what it should actually do. So it's been a real serious problem in terms of losing a very key lever in controlling the macroeconomic environment in this country that makes life affordable, that keeps inflation low, and allows people to live a life, where they're not spending all their money on the basics. So for those reasons alone, I would say the interest rate cap needs to be scrapped, just so that, I think Treasury and CBK are in the process of doing a more thorough report on the impact. But one of the things we already know is that the access and the growth of credit has gone down from about 19% to about 2 to 3%, and the people that are suffering are the small banks and the small businesses. So that engine is now petering out, and I think when we see our GDP growth figures later this year, we'll begin to see the effect of these combined realities that are happening this year on the economy. Okay.
On the same note, and this could be to any of you, what has been happening globally? Brexit, stronger policies, pro-American policies by President Donald Trump and his administration, the East African situation. Has any of them affected Kenya in any way this year? Have we seen a lot of things happening in Kenya because of outside influence, or is Kenya really going through its own storm without impact from outside? How would you describe this year in regards to global activities?
I think if you look at the Kenya, we are facing our own internal challenges.
Okay.
We can't really blame, because nothing significant has happened even in terms of Brexit that can affect the performance of
We haven't seen budgets being cut by foreign donors to our institutions, NGOs, etc.
It has not yet come significant that we can say the reason why we are going through what we are having now. Even if you look at Trump, if you look at the benefits, the AGOA is still there in the US.
True.
If you look at where I agree with my fellow panelists, what we are simply suffering that we make laws that are not even incoherent with the prevailing environment that we are facing. If you look at even the element like interest rate cap, what was being debated is how to price money. You can't price money like any other commodity because elements of risk coming in. And if you look at SMEs that are operating in Kenya, the segment of economy they control is significant. We are seeing now banks reporting losses, all listed banks, 11 of them. We are seeing banks now cutting the number of staff. They are retrenching, they are closing branches. So if you look at this thing of interest rate cap that came as a result of, to me, it was a populist move. If you look at the impact of this, proposal that I have is one, we need to look at everything, because the concept was brilliant, but how we did it was wrong. Because the concept was...
How should we have done it?
We could have done it, because you look at even how to... We need just to empower Kenyans so that Kenya have access to information. They know which bank is charging what interest rate. They know if I want to compare the rates different banks are charging, I go to portal X and I can see everything.
Yes.
And we allow Kenyans to access information. Because if you look at what we are having now, it's sort of like information asymmetry. No one knows which bank is charging in terms of interest rate. Then the next thing that we need to do, we need to stop over-relying on bank funding to drive economic growth. If you look at developed economies, banks fund about 40% of credit in the market. If you look at Kenya, banks fund 95%.
95%.
So we need to diversify credit sources in the country by having strong capital market development framework where people can borrow. We don't need to go to the bank to get credit.
Okay.
So that we can ensure that, because look at the performance of the services sector also being blamed on interest rate cap. Job losses being blamed on interest rate cap. Poor performance SMEs, interest rate cap. So we need to diversify that pool of source of capital.
I think
sorry, go ahead.
I think in terms of linking to what you're saying, in terms of global dynamics, I think it's more of a structural change that's happening. That is, we're beginning to see the effects in Kenya, but I think they'll become more pronounced. I think Trump is a very important story for Africa and Kenya in general. And the reason why it's so important is because he's very insular. And he's obsessed with domestic issues and really doesn't care about Africa at all. I mean, he hasn't even appointed a deputy secretary of African affairs. The ambassador we have from the US is the same one that was there during the Obama period. There are really basic things that he's just not bothering with. And what's happening is that China is beginning to take over that space quite aggressively. If you look at the report that McKinsey released earlier this year around the moves China is making in countries such as Kenya, you'll find that they are becoming very aggressive in taking up our space in the manufacturing sector, services, in terms of trading, in terms of retail and construction. So I think there is this sort of structural transformation going on where we're seeing a receding effect of United States geopolitical interests, and we're seeing an even more pronounced effect of China and what it's doing. I think in terms of Brexit, we're fine. I think we are a priority country for the UK. Okay. And I think we will probably get a better deal now than we could have when the UK was part of the EU and had to be beholden to all of those negotiations. I think that as Kenya, we do have a special position with them, and I think we'll be able to leverage that if we're intelligent about it. But these are things that are structural and long-term, but I don't think that we can ignore them. And I think that the growing debt that we're getting into with China is going to become one of the biggest conversations we're going to have economically in a really short period of time. And we're going to have starting to negotiate with China on how can we manage to pay back all this debt. Because one of the problems with the debt that we're getting into is that it's not generating the economic productivity to pay back those debt obligations. You know, people say, okay, infrastructure financing, it's going to, boom economic growth, it links markets. But when you look at the amount of infrastructure financing we're putting in now for 15 years, we started this with Kibaki, the infrastructure drive, right? We've been doing this for 15 years. Our GDP has not even pretended to reach 10% of Vision 2030. So there are very fundamental problems that are happening, that are happening now in terms of our debt obligations, particularly to China and Japan, that are around, well, our debt is not being as productive as it should be.
That's correct.
We're not going to meet our debt obligations. How are we going to deal with this mountain of debt that we're getting into?
How soon do you think we're going to have to confront the debt question?
2020 latest.
2020
latest. Because if you look at the projections that the National Treasury has, it has a plan to, for example, this year they wanted to bring down our debt to GDP, our fiscal deficit to 6.3%. We're at about 10 right now. And that's why they wanted to implement an austerity budget. And as I said, this election has really put a spanner in the works to them. So the debt question is going to happen very quickly, partly because we are not generating enough revenue. Okay, and the reason we're not generating enough revenue is, one, that we have a very big informal economy that is largely not taxed. As I said, about 90% of Kenyans sit in that economy. They're not getting income tax. they're not getting profit tax. That tax is just not being picked up. But I think one of the biggest stories that people don't like to talk about is transfer pricing and illicit financial flows from large corporations. The KRA does not have the muscle to get the taxes it needs from those. So those are the issues that I think that are structural, that we can't forget. And as the geopolitical environment changes, where America is giving up the space of global leadership to China is eating up that. They don't know when they're going to have someone like Trump in the U.S. again. They are making use of this time, and I think that's really important.
The sun shines.
That's right. They're really going to leverage this time.
Joram, come in.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I think is very ignored in this country is coming up with policies that actually help SMEs grow. I was having a discussion with somebody about SMEs. This is in a developed country in Switzerland, and they actually have laws that protect SMEs. Like, for example, they have this law where after 30 days, the law kicks in, with an automatic penalty if a large company does not pay an SME. If you look at this year with the challenges we've had, for example, in the retail sector, the people who've suffered most because some of the large retail chains are, either going bankrupt or in serious debt and cannot repay their debts. It's a lot of SMEs that have not been paid millions of shillings, and therefore they're the ones who are really suffering here. And I've not seen a very concerted effort. I see a lot of efforts towards, increasing foreign direct investment. I see a lot of effort towards attracting tourists and, building certain kinds of agreements with international players. Maybe China and all sorts of things, but the people who actually hold up this economy, who are the SMEs, I don't see any friendly policies being developed on a day-to-day basis on how they can grow. If anything, with something like the interest rate caps, it's that there are laws that are passed that end up really affecting the SMEs adversely. And so I think there's a lot of room for a lot of policies to be developed targeting very specific sectors on how they can give SMEs a leg up. And also, like she said, we have a very large informal economy, and many of them are not encouraged to become formalized anytime soon, because you're just stepping into a realm where there are all these lawyer costs and all these taxes and all this. So there are a lot of people who'd rather operate informally. I know a lot of people, making up to 700,000 shillings a month making furniture and the like. You just need to drive on some roads in Nairobi to see them, but they'll never register their company formally because they don't want to be netted into the formal economy, just because of all the costs that will kick in, and
once they get into that.
Once they get into that, and so I think there's just a need to relook at how we can support the millions of SMEs to be able to have an environment where it's a lot easier to operate. Any entrepreneur in Kenya will tell you, it's very punishing year in, year out, just trying to overcome the different laws and regulations that you need to have so that you're tax compliant, you're this, that, and the other. It's a very murky world, and I think there's a lot that can be done to ease that, and also to encourage people to formalize, because there's access to credit and other benefits that would come on board if they did that. But at the moment, I don't see any concerted efforts to create that. I just see a lot of efforts.
We had lawmakers on this panel to have that discussion. They left in the previous panel, and of course the big topic then was IBC, so you can't get their attention right now. But I think we're going to call you back once we know the way forward, and then have some lawmakers here and talk about how they're going to pass legislation, for example, to protect SMEs and even those who are below SMEs, those Juakali traders, what laws are being put in place to protect them. In summary, if I can get what you're saying, if Kenya can figure out a way to delink politics from business and sort its debt, then we might have a more rosy future looking forward. But I want to ask you about, and this is maybe on a lighter note, when you look at initiatives like the one by Sarah Serem to reduce MPs' pay, what is there, will that in any way help our economy? A lot of MPs saying, fine, you can reduce our pay, but we don't see where that money will go. Show us how that money will go to bursaries in our constituencies. Show us how that money will go to help in funeral costs, because the money that you're taking away from us, that is what we use to do that as we speak. But from an economic perspective, initiatives like the one by Sarah Serem, how do they help the country?
I think if you look at what we need to stop doing things in piecemeal in Kenya. So that we look at the entire cost income expenditure framework, so that we do a total overhaul. We need to look at all aspects where we spend money, where we are spending money the right way. We need to look at whether do we even need to have 290 MPs. Do we even need to have 47 governors? Because if you look at most of
senators
and all thousands of MCAs, and because if you look at all these things, the majority of the revenue collected in Kenya are mainly spent on this recurrent expenditure. So the government need to take a wholesome look at their expenditure structure so that we come with a long-term solution, as opposed to when we wake up we talk about MPs, the next time we'll talk about MCAs, MPs go back, they increase their salaries, so we're just back to where we are. These are now leading us now to borrow locally aggressively. Banks are now giving money to the government. When we go now to the global markets, again Moody has downgraded Kenya, which now means we can only borrow from the global markets expensively. So we need to take more long-term solutions and stop taking things piece by piece.
Okay, and that's
I mean, absolutely. And I think those wages need to be pushed down further, as you said. I mean, they need to reflect the reality of a developing economy. A lot of our politicians, public officials are earning more than their counterparts in the global north. Okay,
that's correct.
There are much richer economies that pay their MPs, etc., a lot less than we are. I think that's one, and I think one of the reasons that MPs are having such a problem with this is because of the prestige that comes with the money. And I think one of the problems that I have fundamentally with the way we compensate our MPs and our senators and our governors is that it creates a culture where people get into office for the money, not because they want to serve the people. And I think we need to really be very intelligent about it, as this gentleman is saying, where we bring down those wages so people come to serve the people. They don't come to become a big person in a Prado that flies in a helicopter, a celebrity, gives out the money and then leaves. And that's the sort of culture we're engendering with these ridiculous compensation packages that we give to people that I think don't merit it. So I'm completely with the Salaries and Remunerations Commission. I think they need to cut those down even further. I think we need to de-link politics and political office with wealth accrual, because that's where we are right now.
That's an interesting point.
Those two are linked, so that we bring people who want to serve. People who don't mind being broke but want to serve, those are the people we want to be in political office. We don't want people who want to make their money quick, because they know next time they'll be chucked out because they didn't deliver. So I think that link for me is crucial, and I think we as Kenyans need to put pressure on the political class and support people like the SRC and say, I don't see why MCAs should be earning more than 100,000 a month. I really don't see why, you know? And particularly with the sort of laxity we're seeing in fiscal policy at county level, where MCAs not only get a healthy salary, they're also involved in the budget formulation process. They get a lot of the contracts on the side. So there's a whole murky pool going on there in terms of fiscal and budget making at county level that is being leveraged, I think, in a manner that's unfair to SMEs. Well, these are the SMEs that should be providing the services for the county, but deals are made between the different parties in the county government, and suddenly all the contracts have been given out. So I think we really need to delink the link between political office and wealth accumulation, and then maybe we'll get a pool of people who actually want to serve this country.
Okay, and hopefully get money moving around the whole country, not just at one particular tier. Jordan, parting shot briefly.
I think just in addition to that, I think we've spent a lot of time as a country talking about economic reform, political reform, and we've spent a lot of efforts trying to do that. We've made some mistakes definitely along the way, but there's a discussion that's not going on in this country, which is a social discussion in terms of what are our values as a country, what are the things that we uphold as a country. We keep throwing around the whole Chapter 6 discussion, and the reason I bring this in is that just in addition to having holistic conversations about how to reform the economy, is that a lot of the problems you see actually come from a social point of view, where it's a values question. Why are people corrupt? Why are the MCAs, the MPs, people in government making all sorts of decisions that kind of jeopardize the future of the country? It's because we lack a discussion around our value systems, around can we do business with integrity. I can tell you that doing business with integrity in this country is very, very difficult, to some point that there are people who believe you cannot do it.
A lot of people,
I always estimate like probably 90% have in one way or another to compromise the system just to get their things going, whether it's getting a license or getting a deal, getting a contract. And we've built this entire culture that just generates so much waste. A lot of value for money is not delivered towards government projects and those kinds of things. Decisions are made around debt that jeopardize, future generations. And we just need to go back and ask ourselves, do we as a country have the right set of values that will help us make the right decisions, be it in government, be it around economics, be it around politics, where we can get the right kind of leaders. You've seen Nairobi County,
example, go ahead.
Increasing changing collections from like 7 million a day to 38 million a day. Where was that money going to before? And, you know, who's pocketing, you know, public funds and, you know, taking them into private investment? So there's a huge discussion that we need to have, because that's the money that could be paying the SMEs that are probably owed and waiting 120 days to get paid, you know, by some of these institutions. So there's a values discussion that we also need to lump up on top of both the economic and political
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joram Mwinamo, founder, Wild International, and Zete Were, a development economist, Maurice Oduor, investment manager, Cyton Investments. Once the politicking is over, we'll bring you back and hopefully get some lawmakers as well, because I think there's a lot that they need to do in terms of legislation to protect businesses and to help the country move forward. Thank you so much for finding time to be here with us. We certainly hope for positive news from the economy. Lots of doom and gloom, but you've certainly also shared on some areas of growth. And we hope that those who are watching have learned a thing or two. Time now for a short break. When we return, Brian Okoth will be bringing us all the day's trends. What are people talking about on social media? Find out on the other side of this break.